Welcome to a brand new episode of the All Hoops Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Inman, joined as always by producer to the stars and co-host Chris Brito. The second round of the NBA playoffs are in full swing, so Chris and I are going to discuss all four playoff games, plus the always important NBA draft lottery. Is this finally the year for our New York Knicks? That's on Tuesday. Before we get to all that, Chris, my friend, how are you?
Hey, Stevie, I've been enjoying the basketball playoffs. I think it's obviously had its fair share of good ones and bad ones. I'm really looking forward to the end of the Celtics-Bucks series and Suns-Mavericks. But as you said, we'll get into all of that. I think the most important thing on our radar is the NBA draft lottery. The Knicks, obviously the most important thing on our books. They don't have great odds to get the number one pick. But let's just, for the sake of what we're doing today, who do you think the Knicks should go for if we get that top pick?
I think the answer is Paolo Banchero, and I think it's because he's the safest bet amongst these three or four guys to become a star. I'm a little worried about Chet's game. He reminds me a lot of a guy we had here for a long time in Kristaps Porzingis, where, the upside is there. He can defend, he can shoot, but I'm worried about him as this lanky frame. It seems like every time I watch a Gonzaga game, he was on the ground. And I believe Jabari Smith is just too similar to Randall. I don't see how he and Toppin could play. I don't see how him and Randall could play. So the answer is Paolo. I think he's, a guy who could become a really elite 20-point a game plus scorer. I think he can shoot. I think he's a guy who's going to develop a passing game at the NBA level. And that would be the guy that, you put him with RJ Barrett, the two Dukes, wings, and that's your two wings for the next decade.
You know what? I'm kind of the belief that Ivy might be the guy that I'd be targeting. I think the Knicks have been in need of a change of pace point guard. I mean, he's not a true point guard, but he would be a lead guard who can really
He'd probably be a small forward at the NBA level. He's 6'10".
Ivy.
Forward.
Ivy.
Oh, Ivy.
Yeah.
Paolo. Okay.
I also like Paolo too. I think obviously he also gets Tatum comps as well. I don't know. I mean, listen, any of these guys, if we get a top pick, I'd be happy with the exception of Chet. I think someone like Ivy could really bring us back to the Stephon Marbury. No, I'm kidding. Those are not glory days, but he'd be the type of point guard that we've needed on this team for the last 3 decades, and he's someone that I think that once he's in a Knick uniform, I think would really transform this offense, which is in clear need of someone who could create opportunities for the rest of the players on the team.
After winning 37 games last year, the Knicks have the 11th best odds at getting the number one pick, 9.4% chance of getting that top four. And as Chris said, Jaden Ivey would be an amazing lottery pick for the Knicks this year. He would solve their point guard issues that they've been having for the last, 2 decades. And so getting him with that, let's say the fourth pick, we're not asking for the number one pick. Give us the fourth pick. How about the fourth pick? Is that too much to ask? We've been trying to move up in a lottery since 1985. Chris and I weren't even thoughts back then. Let us move up just once, please. This could be the year and really get the Knicks an impact guard who can go with, what is becoming a pretty fun young core.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that moving forward, as you said, I just want to see progress, especially as it relates to our team. But let's just play devil's advocate for me for a second. And it's probably too early to look at NBA prospects to begin with. But are there any names that you're looking at in terms of if we end up staying around that number 11, number 13, number 12 spot?
Good question. We're at 11 right now. I assume we're going to stay around that time. A guy both of us have watched pretty closely, Ojai Abaji from Kansas. He's a senior. He's a guy who reminds me a lot of like maybe a little bit of a bigger Quentin, not bigger, but uh, a similar Quentin Grimes. I think he's a guy you can always use, that 3-and-D kind of guy. Maybe a guy like AJ Griffin. Uh, he's another wing, a freshman from Duke. I don't think he's going to get to 11, but he might. He's a guy who shot the lights out this year, 44% from three. So is that a guy who was very up and down, a little similar to another Nick, Cam Reddish? Is that a guy you'd want to go take with the 11th pick? I probably would. And there's a bunch of different guys, we've been linked a lot to Ty Washington because he's a point guard from Kentucky. I think we're going to see a lot of talk about him to the Knicks. I'm not sure if he can play at this level as a starting point guard, but they're going to have plenty of options. And the hope right now, as it is always every year around this time, is let's see if we can move up in a draft. And then once we can't, we settle into the who can we get at 11. We could talk about that next show.
So one last thing that could give our Knicks fan listeners some hope. As you know, the odds for us to get the top overall pick are like 1.5, right? But back in 1993, Orlando, who won Shaquille O'Neal the year prior, jumped from 11 to number 1.
Penny Hardaway.
And they got Penny Hardaway. And those odds are at 1.5 as well.
Knicks are at 2%. Even better.
Just saying.
I mean, we'll
it's
see.
Happened before.
It'll happen again, maybe soon. One other guy I would say to keep an eye on, the 11th pick, I'm trying to hit a home run. I'm not really looking for the role player guy. We mentioned Obagi, but I'm really looking for that home run swing. And to me, that guy might be Nikola Jovic, who is probably going to go somewhere in the teens. He's a Serbian wing he's like 6'10". He's very gifted offensively. The question kind of is, how good can he be defensively? Is he a guy that Tom Thibodeau would play on the court? But I would definitely be interested in that if you winded up staying with the 11th pick. I'm looking for a wing who could develop into a legit scorer, because offense was a huge issue for the Knicks at times last year. And yes, that's not going to go away until they get a real point guard, but don't just take a point guard just because you need a point guard. If the best player on the board is a small forward, a power forward, whatever, take him.
I think when you're in a position like the Knicks, talent is always what you go for. I think the Knicks are in a particular position where they have employed that strategy in the past with Kevin Knox a few years ago in terms of best available. But I think the talent evaluators on the team have been better as of late.
Let's hope. You can't really do any worse than that, taking Kevin Knox over, SGA and Bridges and all these really good players. But go on.
See, that's what gives me hope, at least. Like, even if we find someone at 14 that it ends up being 11 ends up being a contributor for the team. Even Quentin Grimes, he was a contributor. Jericho Sims I
just think they need an impact guy. I mean,
they do.
Another contributor, great, but you have contributors. What you really need is that impact scorer to go next to a Barrett, Randall. Ideally, it's a point guard, but the way this draft is setting up is probably not going to be a point guard unless you move up. But let's discuss, besides for the Knicks, what team really needs a lottery win the most? Who needs that impact player the most?
Truthfully, I think a team like the Orlando Magic just needs someone else to like sort of rejuvenate that franchise. They got Suggs, they got Cole Anthony a few years ago. Suggs obviously is not the same player that he was in college, or at least making a similar impact. But I think Orlando probably needs it. I mean, because Detroit has Kate already. OKC at least has SGA and Giddey. What does Orlando have, really?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Orlando is a good one. I mean, Cole Anthony, we gave him credit, but at the same time, you're talking about a guy who shot 39% from the floor for the year, and Jalen Suggs was worse. He shot 36% from the floor for the year. And so you can't make the case that those guys are building blocks for the next good Magic team. shooting like that. Obviously, guys can get better. They're young point guards. You hope they get better, but this team really needs an impact Paolo Banchero kind of player, to go with these guys. And I just think, they've been rebuilding for so long, but they just haven't hit on their picks. It's as simple as that. Mo Bamba is still on this team. He was a 6th overall pick. That didn't work. So they're going to have to find somebody to build around. And I think this is a great year for that. My team would be the Oklahoma City Thunder. I like the idea of, three of these guys are probably power forwards at the next level, and Paolo, Chet, and Jabari Smith. Those are all the, potential number 1 picks. You put those with an SGA and a Giddey. I think that's a fun big 3 that, 1, could start to make competitive noise, and 2, with the Thunder, they have every draft pick in the world. You can go in a year from now and add a big time wing to go with those guys, a center, somebody with those. You can really go out and get basically any available star you want with those 31st round picks or something insane like that. So I like the idea of one of these stars going to Oklahoma City.
See, to me, like, my only issue with that is that OKC isn't going to get they're not that interesting to me. Like, what they're doing out there, it's like not that interesting. I don't know what Sam Presti's end game is. Like, where do you see that plan in 3 years? Where do you
see it planning out the way I just described? They hit a lottery. They have SGA. They have Giddey. They have all the cap space and draft picks in the world.
At what point do you decide, okay, like, I want to build a team that can contend for the playoffs?
When they find a guy who can impact winning in the draft immediately. I don't know if that's this year. I don't know if that's next year. But when you find that guy who can say, okay,
but it seems like a crapshoot strategy.
Is it though? So far, this strategy has gotten them 2 building blocks in SGA and Giddey. They have a fairly good chance of getting a 3rd one.
But they didn't draft SGA though.
They traded.
They did draft
SGA.
They did draft Lu Dort though, right?
Lu Dort was undrafted.
Okay.
They got, they have a 48% chance of getting in the top 4 this year. You're talking about you got to hit the right guys, obviously. This whole strategy only works if you draft the right players, which you're talking about a guy who's drafted Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Ibaka, Sabonis, the list goes on and on of really all-star caliber players that Sam Presti has drafted.
Sam Presti drafted Sabonis? I thought.
Yeah, and then they sent him to Orlando for Victor Oladipo. And to me, that's the way I would do it. You're not going to get free agents to want to commit to Oklahoma City. You've seen all their superstars, the guys we just mentioned, plus Paul George. I don't want to be in Oklahoma City. So the only way to do it is through the draft. And way
you know what? That strategy might work for a small market team where there's
I'm just saying it's going to work for them. I don't know if it's something you could do everywhere else, but it's definitely the way I would build that team up or down based on that market.
Okay, fair enough.
So I'm hoping it works out for them. I think it's going to work out for them sooner rather than later. And you're going to start to see other teams kind of following their model. And that's the way it always works. If that strategy works, other teams are going to copycat. If it doesn't work, they're not. But we'll see. And obviously, so many teams can use that impact guy. One other team I would mention is Portland. You have Damian Lillard, you have Simons. There's not really a lot else on that roster. They really could use an impact player. And I think Jabari or Chet or any of these guys really fits in well with that backcourt duo because, those are guys that Lillard can help set up. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But moving forward, the NBA playoffs are still in effect, Chris, obviously. 2nd round. It's been some pretty interesting series. Which is the most interesting to you and why?
So I really like the Suns Mavericks series going on right now. I think you have 2 of the younger superstars in the league in Devin Booker and Luka Doncic headlining those ones. And it's clear that they don't like each other. And the other added layer of that is that the Suns could have drafted Luka to pair him up with Devin Booker. But now instead we have a potentially even better solution to that. Like now there's a rivalry brewing. they could be two players that will consistently face each other during the playoffs in their careers. And so I think after whatever happens in this series, which I think the Suns will win, I'm sure Luka will have to look in himself and the team will have to look at itself in the mirror and be like, look, this is what happens when you get help. He doesn't have any help right now. Who's the second best player on that team? Jalen Brunson?
Yeah.
I mean, Jalen is great, but if you're going to pay that man a lot of money, he needs to be showing up for the playoffs against the Suns too. He did a great job against Utah, but Utah has a turnstile defense, with the exception of Rudy Gobert. But I think to me, this is the start, the origin story of a Suns Mavericks rivalry that we'll be seeing for years to come in the playoffs.
I hope you're right. I mean, that it's been a great series so far, right? And I'm watching the game and the Suns are up 49-46 at the half. You go to bed and then all of a sudden you wake up and it's Suns win by 30. What happened? I mean, it's hard for me to believe that the Mavericks can fight back from that. I understand they're going back home, but I just don't think there's enough talent on this roster. As you mentioned, Jalen Brunson is not a number 2 on a championship caliber team. It just isn't going to work. So I think the biggest series left is Boston-Milwaukee. I think the winner of this is going to the finals. You know, Giannis just looks unstoppable. And the question is it enough? You know, there's no Middleton. Drew Holiday has not been good. They don't really have a lot of other scoring options on this team. I don't love the way Bud coaches in the playoffs. We've seen that before, right? So is it the more well-rounded team who's going to win, or is it the team with the best player? And I'm really excited to see how that plays out.
Who do you think wins game five?
I'm going to say Boston. I just think, you know, with them being home and, you know, Tatum and Brown look good. And if you're going to get contributions like that from Horford, I think they're going to win it.
So just to note to our listeners that we're recording this on May 11th, Wednesday, before that game 5 game. I don't know. To me, the Bucks just present just Giannis is a force of nature. He reminds me in the way that young LeBron was when he was before the Heatles and before the Lakers, and before the second stint with the Cavs. It's just he's the best player on the planet and there's no one that can stop it. You know, I think you can always count on for people who bet, right? I think, you know how betting against LeBron is always a mistake. I feel like betting against Giannis is now that level. So,
I mean, we got to a point, I would say it's 2007 to 2018, where the conference always goes through LeBron, right? If you beat LeBron, you're in the driver's seat to win a championship, which didn't happen very often. You know, he made the finals, 10 straight years or something insane like that. Now the conference goes through Giannis. If you could beat Giannis, you have an excellent chance of winning an NBA championship. If you can't, you tip your hat because he's as good as anybody right now. So I'm curious to see how this plays out. I don't think either of these, the Heat or the Sixers could beat either of these teams. So I really do believe we're looking at an Eastern Conference Finals right now.
Dude, I don't get the whole Miami Heat thing. I'll be honest with you. I love the concept of Miami culture, but I just don't see that team having enough offense to beat either one of the Celtics or the Bucks in the next round.
And this is a team that just beat Philly by 30, and we're still I don't know. So what does that say about Philly?
I mean, Philly is such a flawed team. They for 2 games they allowed a very injured Embiid and a washed up James Harden beat them.
Washed up. Wow.
Am I wrong?
I don't know. I don't think he's washed up, but I don't think he's
okay. Less effective James Harden.
Yeah. Diminish James Harden. I mean, we're going to get to later about what the Sixers should do with him in terms of giving him a max deal. But yeah.
I'm glad you're teasing that. But just to end on the Sixers point real quick, and the Heat point, I am not impressed with the Heat at all.
I think it's interesting because if Lowry was fully healthy, I think this is a very different team, but he's not.
But
He's not healthy. He's already ruled out for game 6. He didn't play game 5. He's been banged up for a while now. He's 37. This might just be what it is. And what that is you need Jimmy Butler to carry you. And then you need a guy like Strus, you need Hero, you need Robinson, you need these kind of guys to shoot the lights out. And that's something they're very capable of doing. I just wouldn't bet on it.
Well, you know what? You know who is an X factor for me? And I didn't really think about it till I saw last night's game and the game last Friday. Victor Oladipo, man, good for him. Good for him, man. He's obviously not the same player, but he's an effective bench player. And I think he's going to get a nice contract this summer.
Yeah, he's been a very steady contributor in the second half of the season for Miami. I think he had 15 in their last game. Like, that's kind of what you can expect from him. And that's a pretty good ask for a guy making, the mid-level exception, $5 to $10 million a year. It's a shame because, he was offered a lot more than that, in both Houston and Indiana, but that's the way it goes. He's still very rich and he's going to keep making money in the NBA. So don't feel too bad for him. But I hope he can continue to find some success. And I hope this Miami team can make a competitive series in the Eastern Conference Finals against whoever they play.
Agreed.
All right. Chris, these last series, Golden State, Memphis, obviously no John Morant. Anything else to say about this? I don't think Golden State has played very well, and I don't think it really matters.
It doesn't matter. I did think that what Draymond said the other night was, yesterday or whenever it was, he said that, the Grizzlies need to become like a playoff team. Like they're not the Timberwolves. And it's so true to an extent because I think the Grizzlies played really well the regular season. I think they were sort of like shook up a little bit by the T-Wolves, who also weren't part of the playoffs for a very long time. The Grizzlies were in the playoffs last year, but you know what I'm saying. They're just like this young team, I think, needs some veteran leadership to be added over the summer. I think that would be like something that they need to add. I think their youthfulness has been on display both against the Timberwolves and the Warriors. So, but you know what? By all intents and purposes, we went from, this Memphis team could be a lower seed top 8 team to them being one of the best teams in the West. They made it to the second round of the playoffs. This season is a win for them.
Absolutely. I'm with you there. Would like to see John Morant in a couple more games, but it is what it is. And, maybe they'll do one of those 3-for-1 consolidation trades to go get themselves a star vet to pair with John Morant and Jaren Jackson. But yeah, let's get to our final thoughts right after this. All right, Chris, final thoughts time here. Jeannie Buss finally came out of silence and basically said just about every front office, high-ranking guy for the Lakers has a say right now. Rob Pelinka is the GM. Kurt Rambis has been in this front office doing something in a high-ranking role for a while now. Phil Jackson apparently is a consultant. Magic Johnson, after ditching the team in a full-time role, is back and is, called Pelinka a backstabber, but now they're working together and we're not sure what that relationship is. Oh, and by the way, you have LeBron James and Clutch. So that's 5 different powerful entities all in one Laker front office. And you can make the case that none of them have had success in a front office role before.
Yeah. I think Jeannie is setting up herself to fail, but what do I know about running a team business? So here's what I would do if I'm the Lakers. I think you can have those guys be consultants, whatever managerial role they present and they are in the company. But they need to hire Jerry West back. I don't know. I'm kidding. It's a really untenable situation there because you're getting LeBron at his final years. He obviously has championship aspirations, but I don't know how you fix this team. I don't. I think the Lakers leadership think that they're better than what they are, and people are what people really are. They're just they're laughing at this beloved franchise who's having a really bad year. But I will say the one thing I will give credit to, not necessarily credit, but like the Lakers did have a season where Anthony Davis was injured. So if he's healthy and LeBron is healthy, I think you add a lot of wins to what they have right now. And if you subtract, Russell Westbrook somehow, I think you do it. I mean,
Sure.
I think this team could be better than what they were this year.
Anthony Davis, though, is always hurt. LeBron James has missed chunks of the last basically every year in LA. This is what, year 4 in LA? He's missed a chunk of every one of those years. I don't think going into year, 20 for LeBron, 19, 20 for LeBron, you can ask him to be healthier. And Anthony Davis is now getting towards age 30. I don't know if you can ask him to be healthier. And, for Jeannie Buss to kind of come out here and say, well, the next coach can probably figure out how to use Russell Westbrook in this offense, tells you 2 things. 1, they're delusional. And 2, that they can't trade Russell Westbrook. And if they can't trade Russell Westbrook, I don't see how this team is going to look much different next year. And if you got a guy making 40, I don't care what team it is in the NBA, who they have on their team. If you have Russell Westbrook in a major role at 34 years old, making $47 million a year, you're not winning anything. So I don't really see, maybe this team squeaks into the playoffs, maybe they don't, but I think next year is more going to be about, let's celebrate LeBron in his year where he's going to get the all-time scoring points total over Kareem. And then maybe he goes somewhere else. Maybe he goes back to Cleveland. Maybe he goes to Miami. Maybe he goes somewhere where they're going to promise him a high-ranking front office role, but he's only under contract for a year. So I don't know if this is going to last much longer because I don't really see a way out for the Lakers.
Yeah, I think clearly Genie is posturing with all the things that you're just saying. And to an extent, you're right when you're saying that, like, you can't expect LeBron and Anthony Davis to be healthy for all 82 games plus the playoffs.
LeBron played 56 this year. I think that's a reasonable expectation going forward.
Yeah. He should be getting the Kyle Lowry treatment, but here we are. Yeah, I mean the Lakers clearly need to look at themselves in the mirror. I think moving forward, here's what the Lakers should do. They should trade for Julius Randle. That's what they should do.
I mean, Davis has played in 65 games 0 times in the last 4 years. He'll be 30 next year. I think this is what it is. Yeah. And should they be better than they were? Yes, they should be better than they were. This is Anthony Davis, LeBron James, and a bunch of parts that don't fit should be a playoff team for sure, even if they're not playing every game. But I don't see how they become better than what they were 2 years ago, which is a feisty first round team that probably loses in 5 or 6 games. And that's not really acceptable in LeBron James land. And that's why I do believe he might leave for another team at the end of his Laker contract at the end of next year.
Where should he go?
Obviously, he should go to the Knicks, but we will discuss that another time. The Lakers should just give Sam Presti a blank check and say, you can decide who you want to keep, who you want to get rid of, but they're not going to do that.
But also Sam Presti would not work in LA.
Why not?
Because you
I know he's a Boston guy.
You can't employ the same OKC strategy to the Lakers. The Lakers are always in win now mode. Always.
They can't.
I know they can't, but like that's just the reality of what they are. They are a premier franchise that are built.
It reminds me a lot of in baseball. Andrew Friedman was the Sam Presti of baseball. He turned these Tampa Bay teams that were like, we're not spending any money. They would find talent every year and they'd win their 90 plus games. They'd make a playoff run. And they did that for a decade. And it was the most impressive thing I've ever seen in baseball. More impressive than the A's with Moneyball. This was the real Moneyball. They were actually going to World Series. And then the Dodgers come along and they have all their money. And they said, here's a blank check, come run our team. And he goes, okay. And he did. And they've won the division now, 9 years in a row, coming off a World Series championship, where you combine the talent, the scouting, along with the money, you're unbeatable. and that's where the Dodgers are now. And I don't see why the Lakers couldn't do that with Sam Presti if they're willing to get out of their own way, fire all the family members and all the people who are in, the Phil Jacksons and the Magics and all these people who are in there, but they're not going to do that.
Yes, on one level, I agree that it should be someone who has a basketball and like executive mind that should be running the team. My only issue is with Sam Presti's body of work. I don't know,
he's built contenders before.
He has, but you need patience for that. And do the Lakers strike you as a team that will wait? They could barely wait when they had D'Angelo Russell, Randall
Clarkson, yeah,
those guys, and that was like a fun little team also. But
yes, but I also think you'll have a lot more patience when you're not a LeBron team. No LeBron team's ever had patience, and I think this LeBron, whether he signs for a couple more years or not, the LeBron era is nearing its end. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Another guy who seems like he's nearing his end, James Harden, who has had a great game 4 and has looked more or less like a role player in the rest of these games here in this second round. Should he get a max deal in Philly? And if not, what the heck should Philly do?
Well, should is a very strong word, I think, in this context. He should not get a max deal. But will he? He will.
You think he will?
He will.
It's a concern because you can already, this is a very Nick thing to do, where it's like you can already see the tires kind of, falling off the wheel, and you're talking about a 4 or 5 year deal at max money for a guy who's had trouble being in shape in his prime. How is that going to look when he gets into his mid to late 30s?
I mean, you can see the results of that right now.
I would be very scared to do that. And I understand if they don't, they look dumb for trading 2 first-round picks and Ben Simmons for Harden, but 2 wrongs shouldn't make a right. You shouldn't just do it just because you already made the trade. I would do everything.
Right. I think in that scenario, pride is talking, and I think it's just the wrong decision to make. I would almost rather get Zach Levine and just bite the bullet.
Yeah, I was gonna say I would do everything in my power to sneakily go and try to recruit Bradley Beal or Zach Levine and say you could be a running mate with Embiid. You're gonna have some help, but also we're gonna need you to carry the load on times. And look, if that works, amazing. And if not, then you consider bringing Harden back on a giant deal. But the key is doing it to a point where Harden does not feel like he's your plan B or C, because if not, that's a recipe for disaster.
God forbid.
God forbid, right? Last thing, Brian Windhorst on his show brought up Zach Levine to Portland rumor. He's a free agent at the end of the year, and everyone right now is assuming he is not going back to Chicago. He's a Seattle guy, so the closest place would be Portland. Do you like the fit of Dame and Levine together?
I like it because Dame gets help. Dame gets someone who can carry the scoring load. But I don't know if Zach Levine is the fit. But also, what player would be the appropriate one next to Dame anyway?
That's a good point. I don't see how Levine with Dame is really any different than Dame with CJ. I don't get it.
Well, I think Zach Levine might.
They're very similar players.
They're not, though, because I think CJ is more he's a guard, but he leans a little bit more of as someone who can create for others. Whereas Zach Levine, it leans more toward a scorer and more of a guy who's a secondary playmaker,
I just don't see it. I mean, they're both guys who don't play a lot of defense.
Okay, yeah, but they're
how does that play out with Simons too? You had a great year out of Simons. You have to extend him. You're talking about Dame, Simons, and Levine, all of which are undersized guards for their position who all need the ball and all don't play any defense.
Honestly,
so I'm not really sure how that makes them better than what they've been in the last few years.
Dude, honestly, I think Portland should get on the phone with Philly and get Dame to Philly. I don't know what trade pieces they would have to trade, but that's something I would really consider.
I think there's a better chance that that Portland winds up doing the Levine thing and saying, there you go, Dame, we got you your running mate, and just tries to run it back for 3 or 4 years as Dame basically plays the majority of his prime in Portland. I don't think Dame is going anywhere. I just don't see it. And I'm curious to see how it plays out, because like a lot of teams could use Zach Levine, and he's a guy who I'm not sure is really going to make too many teams better. I'm not sure if he's that kind of guy. We'll see. We'll see. I can't wait for free agency, my friend. It's going to be a lot of fun. But first, the draft lottery. That is going to do it for us.
Oh, wait. One last thing. One last thing. What about Zach in Dallas?
I don't see how he's going to play with Luka. I think it's an upgrade over Brunson. So if you want to do that, that's fine. But I don't really know if that's a contending team either.
Okay.
But I think that's a better idea than Portland.
Okay. The last thing I wanted to bring up, what did you think of Winning Time?
I thought Winning Time was very good. Obviously, those eras of basketball in 1980 and, around then was a little before our time. So we're kind of like, we know these stories, but we don't know them well. And so it's been very fascinating. I've been trying to figure out what's real and what's not. Obviously, they're fabricating some things, but overall, it's been very good. They're a group that's easy to root for after 10 episodes, right? And I'm excited to see how they continue this story second season.
I gotta say, I love the the Magic Johnson actor. I really like the Jerry West one too, even though obviously made him a bit into a caricature. But yeah, I really enjoyed the series. I don't really understand why the NBA was so felt the way they did about that series, but we'll see if there's a season 2. But
there is a season 2. It's already been renewed.
There is? Oh,
yeah.
Even better.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. So that is going to do it for us here on All Hoops. Chris, my friend, thank you so much. We'll be back next week to discuss the conference final matchups and who won the NBA lottery.
Bye, everyone.